Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in 2026, week 7, February 9th through the 15th, and this is the week of electrical. Well, one of probably many weeks of electrical, but this video is definitely all electrical other than right now, where I'm just going through some new parts that I got. So this is something I'm pretty consistent with. Like when I get a new part, I will check it out, make sure I got all the right parts, I'm not missing anything. Obviously with some things like doors, I can't fully check that they're right until I actually go to mount them, but all the small stuff, just make sure all the parts are there. So right there in my hand is a new 8-pin through panel connector. That's what I'm going to use for running power from inside the car to the engine bay. And the reason why I'm doing that is those pins are a little bit bigger, so I can do less wires, so I can actually free up some spots in my through panel firewall. But that'll just handle all the power. Those are 12 gauge pins, so they'll do 25 amps each, so I don't need to split up the water pump and stuff anymore. I can just run it straight to the device. And that's my new roller timing set. So when I eventually get to building the engine, that's going to be one of the critical parts. That reminds me I should go and buy my oil pump. I'm going to go do that now before I forget again. Alright, even though I never actually left, as far as you guys know, I'm back now from buying my new oil pump. So that'll be here in a couple of weeks. I will need that for the engine build, so might as well get it out of the way now that I'm thinking about it, considering I've forgotten to buy it for like 2 months now. Anyways, I'm just going through some paint here. So I did end up buying more paint. After doing the cage, I was like, I might run out of red before I get to all the parts that I want to paint red. So I'll just buy some more and just have it. So I bought another quart of red, and I bought another gallon of black. I'm down to about, I don't know, I think about a half gallon of black, and that's just from the interior and the diff, and the inside of the roof. So I was like, okay, well, if we're doing the entire outside of the car, plus doors, fenders, underneath the back, I'm just get some more. That way I have it. It isn't cheap, but it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Alright, now that I'm gone through all those parts, it is back to running wires. So got a few harnesses to do. I think I am starting with sensor wires for the front, and I'm just kind of drawing out right now how I'm going to run the wires and split them, because I need to run sensor wires to the back, I need to run sensor wires to the front. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay, I need a sensor plus 5 volts, sensor ground, and then the actual sensor input wires. So I'm just like, okay, how am I going to do this? My original thought was, I'd have a single sensor plus 5 come out of the ECU, do a split right before the wires go front and back, and then I would have another split at the front, because I got wires going to either side of the car. But I think I settled on, I'm just going to, like, the ECU has multiple sensor outputs, pretty much one per connector. So I think I settled on, I'm going to run the front sensors to, did I don't remember. I'm going to go check real quick. No, I did. Never mind. I don't have to go check. I did do 2 harnesses, one for the front, one for the back. So what'll happen is the front sensors have its own 5 volts that'll split near the front. Same with the ground, sensor ground. And then the rear sensors have their own sensor and ground, which I split towards the rear. And then they'll go into the ECU into 2 different connectors, because I do have a bunch of sensor and ground outputs from the ECU. So yeah, so I'm just building, looking at the colors, the wires. I'm currently building the harness that's going to go to the front. So I've got 3 sensor wires going to the passenger side. I've got 3 sensor wires going to the driver's side. And then I actually messed up and I forgot to run my clutch position sensor wire up to the front. So instead of running another wire through this entire harness, instead of having 3 to the driver's side with 2 spares, I'll have 2 to the driver's side, and then I'll pull that 3rd wire for the clutch position sensor. Not the end of the world. I'll still have 2 spares on the passenger side if I need anything. Plus, I've got a few spares in the main engine harness. And I don't really, I say this now, but I don't really foresee needing any more inputs in the engine bay after what I already have. So we're just going to run with it. And then, in the future, if I have to run more wires, I will run more wires. Or just be like, you know what, this car is good enough. It's a street car. It's not a full-on race car. I don't need every sensor in the world. I don't need every input used. So we'll see. We're just going to run with it because at this point in time, I didn't realize I was fucking up. But yeah, so I'm just going to do the same thing that I did for all the other harnesses. Get them all bundled up, twist the wires together, and then in a couple of different bundles. And then I will twist all of those wires together again. So pretty much the same thing I did for the engine harness and for the other harnesses that I built previously. All right, now that we are done the front sensors, we are going to do similar thing with the back sensors. So my idea is I'm going to run a single DTM12. That is a 12-pin connector. And the reason why I'm going to run DTM12 is I can do 4 inputs, 4 sensor plus, and 4 sensor grounds. In the back of the car, I don't have the through panel connectors. I just have a grommet going to underneath the car. So my idea is I will run these wires to just above the rear pan of the car. I'll have my 12 connector, and then I'll just run wires and loom through to the bottom of the car and then out to the sensors as needed. So I'm going to have 2 wires for shock sensors, 1 for my flex fuel sensor, and then 1 spare. Don't know if I'm going to need the spare, but I'm going to have it just in case. It's certainly not going to hurt any. So yeah, so as I said, it's the same thing. Only difference here is I'm going to split the power and the ground from 1 to 4 on both of them. So they'll both get 4 additional wires towards the back of the car. That way it just goes into the connector. So I'll have, as I say, the 4 inputs, the 4 inputs, 4 powers, and 4 grounds going into that 12-pin connector. But yeah, other than that, it's the same thing. Twist all the wires together. Twist 2 one way, twist another 2 the other way, twist those 2 around each other the same way, twist the other 2 the opposite direction, and twist around the main bundle the opposite direction. So I'm not really going to talk too much more because it's just the same thing I've already been doing. So I do still have a few more wires to run in the car, but that's okay. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to jump on to terminating the engine harness. Now you would have seen me do this same thing like 2 years ago, shit, maybe even 3 at this point. But I'm going to do it again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, or am I going to do a little bit of wire routing right now? I don't remember what I'm going to do. Looks like I might do a little bit of wire routing first, but it doesn't matter. So for terminating the engine harness, what I'm going to do is cut all the wires down to the same length, strip them all, and then I will pin them all with DTM pins, because those are the small like 22 gauge pins. Once I do that, I will start installing the pins into the firewall connector. Now, the firewall connector is on this pin side. When I'm looking at it, all the pins are reversed compared to the socket side or the engine bay side. So I got to pay very close attention as I'm installing this to make sure I get everything in the right place. Otherwise, I might be throwing like an injector wire to a coil or vice versa, or, you know, pinning a sensor wrong. But what I'm also doing as I go through this is I am checking it at the ECU connector. So on my sheet, I'm like, okay, this pin goes into this cavity and goes to this pin on the ECU. So I actually take my multimeter and I check continuity between that pin on the ECU plug and, you know, the wire that I have to make sure that the wire is right. There's a couple of purple wires, for example. I believe one goes to an injector and one's the fuel pressure sensor wire. So I got to make sure I got the right purple. Same thing, there's a couple of greens. I think one's TPS and one's an injector. And, you know, I just definitely want to make sure that I'm putting all of the wires back into the correct places in this. So just double checking, triple checking, and making sure it's all right. Before I actually plug it in, I will probably either just plug in the engine harness, you know, just kind of in the car, and double check all of the end sensors and just make sure that's right. It's not a terrible idea to do that, so I might just do that. I haven't fully decided yet. That's going to be a problem for future Ben. But yeah, so one of the things I was also doing as I was going through this is I was counting all the wires, because I know that there should be 42 wires. Well, technically 34 plus 4 in each of the cam and crank wires. So I know I should have 34 in my hand. For some reason, I ended up with 35. I eventually realized what had happened is I used to have the EST ground wire. It went up and then it split to go out to either fire outside through panel connector, one on the driver's side, one on the passenger side, because I used to have coils going out that way. But I'm moving that into the engine harness now, and there is the split there still. So when I was counting up the 43 wires, it's because of the split. So as soon as I got rid of that split, oh, okay, now I only have 42. I got the right amount. That's exactly what I need. So I was happy to continue on and, you know, just pop this and get it all wired in. I'm just happy that I figured out that I had the extra wire before I got too carried away. Because what I just did is I knew I had to relabel the cam and the crank with my heat shrink label, because a bunch of the wires, as I retwisted them all, they were all different lengths. So I had to cut it down and I had to cut it back behind where I'd previously put the labels. So I cut it back and then I counted all of the wires and I realized I had 43. So I was like, oh shit, this isn't good. So I actually ended up having to go back and relabel it a third time, because I have to cut the bundle back before that splits. I also double check and make sure I have enough wire to get up to where it needs to go in the firewall, and I do. That's not a problem. Yeah, so just good PSA for double checking your work. Yeah, so after this, I'm just going to strip all 42 wires, crimp all 42 wires, and then start installing them in the harness. All right, so you can kind of see that as I'm going through this, I've got my little red probe. On my sheet, it tells me, you know, J1, B15 is, you know, whatever pin. So I know, okay, B15, that should go to this. So I check and make sure it's right. And then I'm just installing this. So I'm using a pair of needle nose pliers to pull the pins through, because the 22 gauge wire is very thin and very bendy, so you can't really push the pins in there on your own. You can get them started, but you really got to just kind of give a little bit of a tug on the other end just to get it fully seated. now that I have the engine or the firewall side done, I'm going to terminate my 3 input wires into the Holly. So for the engine harness, I have 2 spare inputs and an output, I think. Yeah, I think that's what I have. So that's those 3 wires you can kind of see. They're just 22 gauge, but yeah, so 2 spare, I think it's 2 spare inputs and a spare output. So I just got to terminate those and then get those crimped and installed in the Holly. Now that the engine harness is done, I'm just going to do some routing and mounting of these harnesses. So I just want to get everything a little bit cleaned up. Like, it's a pretty big mess right now. There's wires everywhere. So I want to take just a little bit of time, get the wires that need to go up towards the ECU, get everything kind of zip tied and looking nice. It helps me know that I'm making progress when it, looks a little bit proper, even though I know I still have at least one more harness to run to the back, and then I've got more wires to run just kind of in the front. I just like to make it look nice. It, as I say, it makes me think that I'm making good progress. And don't get me wrong, I am making good progress on this. I just, mentally, I need to know that I am. I know there is still so much more work to do on this car. But just like, as I say, for me mentally, just that little bit of like done up bundle there, that just already looks so much better. And it helps drive me to keep going because it looks good. I feel good getting it done. There's just no downsides to doing it. At least I don't think there's any downsides to doing it. Now that that's a little cleaned up and looking much better, I'm going to take a seat and I'm just going to send some sensor wires through this passenger terminal. So we've got sensor plus, sensor ground, and then I have 3 inputs. One input is going to go to the shock sensor, and then I'll have 2 inputs as just spares. I don't really know what I would use them for, but it's better to have them and not use them than to need them and not have them. So it's kind of around this time I realized I fucked up a bit. I was supposed to run a clutch position sensor wire over into this area when I ran the front sensors, and I didn't. So I ran, sensor positive, sensor ground, and then 3 inputs. One was going to be for the shock sensor, and then 2 were going to be spares in that passenger side just to have them. At one point in time, I was like, do I just run another input up here? I would be pulling that harness out, adding another wire to it. And I just eventually decided, I'm like, no, I don't need it. I will just take one of the input wires that I have. I can split the sensor in the ground. That's not a big deal. Even though I already split sensor in the ground a little bit early in the harness, it would have been just as easy to split it at that point. Not the end of the world. And then I ended up I cut the sensor in the ground and I did it. I was like, or the power's in the ground. I was like, just do it. And I was praising myself so much. I was like, you know what? I did it. I didn't, hesitate. It didn't take too long to think about it because that's the problem with me. I just want to overanalyze and I get paralyzed and I don't do anything. So I cut it. So then I also cut the sensor wire because, I got to cut it and splice it because, for the sensor ground, I need to have the incoming wire cut, and then I need it to go 2 out, 1 to the clutch position sensor, 1 over to the firewall. Same thing with the ground. So I cut that, I cut the ground, and I cut the sensor wire, and I realized, Ben, you dumb fuck, you didn't need to cut the sensor wire. That could have just gone straight into the clutch position sensor. So I was tooting my own horn and praising myself for being proactive and just doing it. But then by not thinking about it, I cut the sensor input wire. It's not a big deal. I can splice it. But that is all the time that we have for today. So as always, if you stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll see you in the next one.